They thought they were just walking away from a relationship. They thought they could betray you, discard your loyalty, ignore your value, and continue living exactly as they always had. In their minds, nothing significant was happening. It was just another decision, just another person, just another bridge they could burn without consequence. But what they didn't understand was that your presence carried something they couldn't see. And people rarely appreciate what they cannot see. They notice the conversations, but not the covering. They notice the friendship, but not the favor attached to it. They noticed your loyalty, but they never recognized the protection that seemed to follow wherever you went. That's why the betrayal felt so easy to them in the moment. They assumed they were removing a person from their life. They had no idea they were removing a blessing. Listen carefully. Some connections are ordinary. Some are transactional. Some exist only for a season. But every so often, a person enters someone's life carrying a frequency that changes the entire environment around them. Doors open more easily. Conflicts settle faster. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Problems that should have become disasters somehow dissolve before reaching their full potential. Most people never stop to question it. They simply assume it's normal. They assume it's theirs. They assume the peace, the favor, the protection, and the unusual flow of good fortune belong to them. And that's where the mistake begins. Because when someone starts believing they are the source of blessings, they merely happen to be standing near. Arrogance inevitably follows. Gratitude disappears. Humility disappears. Respect disappears. Eventually, they begin taking for granted the very thing that helped stabilize their life in the first place. That's exactly what happened here. The betrayal wasn't just an act of disloyalty. It was an act of blindness. They misjudged the value of what was standing in front of them. And the moment they severed that connection, they discovered something that changed everything. What they thought was their power may never have been theirs at all. And that's where this story truly begins. Number 1, the illusion of their own power. One of the most dangerous things that can happen to a person is becoming accustomed to blessings they didn't create. Not because blessings are dangerous, but because familiarity often breeds blindness. When good things happen consistently enough, people stop questioning where those good things are coming from. They stop feeling gratitude. They stop paying attention. Eventually, they start believing they are the source of everything flowing into their life. That's exactly what happened to many of the people who betrayed chosen ones. For years, things seemed to work in their favor. Opportunities appeared. Problems resolved themselves. Relationships held together longer than they should have. Mistakes that should have carried serious consequences somehow passed with minimal damage. Doors kept opening. Circumstances kept aligning. They became comfortable. They became confident. Then confidence slowly transformed into entitlement. The problem wasn't that they were successful. The problem was that they misunderstood the source of their success. Instead of remaining humble, they began believing their own mythology. They convinced themselves that every breakthrough was proof of their brilliance. Every opportunity was proof of their superiority. Every season of peace was proof that they had mastered life. They never considered that some of what they were experiencing might have been connected to the people surrounding them, especially the people carrying genuine integrity, loyalty, and spiritual alignment. Listen carefully. There are people who walk into a room and change the atmosphere without saying a word. Not because they're trying to, not because they're performing, but because they carry a certain energy, a certain steadiness, a certain alignment. When they're present, chaos seems to settle. When they're involved, situations somehow move differently. They become an unseen stabilizing force in the lives of those around them. The tragedy is that people rarely notice this while it's happening. Human nature tends to take consistent blessings for granted. The sun rises every morning, so people stop admiring it. Air fills their lungs every second, so people stop appreciating it. In the same way, when someone has benefited from your presence long enough, they stop recognizing the difference you're making. What was once appreciated becomes expected. What was once valued becomes assumed. That's when arrogance enters the picture. Arrogance whispers dangerous ideas. It tells people they no longer need the people who helped them grow. It convinces them they're self-made. It persuades them that loyalty is expendable and relationships are replaceable. Eventually, they start treating valuable connections as though they're ordinary. And that's where the fall begins. Because the moment someone starts believing they're bigger than the blessings surrounding them, they lose the ability to recognize value. They stop honoring what matters. They stop protecting what matters. They start making decisions based on ego instead of wisdom. You may have witnessed this yourself. Maybe they became dismissive. Maybe they became disrespectful. Maybe they acted as though your presence was interchangeable. Maybe they genuinely believed they would remove you from the equation and experience no meaningful change. Why? Because everything had been working for so long that they assumed it would continue working forever. That's the illusion. People often mistake a season of favor for permanent ownership. They think because they've experienced peace, they own peace. Because they've experienced abundance, they own abundance. Because they've experienced protection, they own protection. But some things are gifts, and gifts should never be confused with guarantees. The people who betrayed you learned that lesson the hard way. They believed they were standing on solid ground when, in reality, they were standing on blessings they no longer respected. The moment they severed the connection, the environment around them began changing in ways they couldn't explain. Not immediately in every case. Not dramatically overnight. But slowly, undeniably, the ease they once took for granted began disappearing. And that's when confusion entered the story. Because for the first time, they were forced to face a possibility their ego had never allowed them to consider. What if they weren't as powerful as they thought? What if the stability they enjoyed wasn't entirely self-created? What if the very person they dismissed was carrying far more value than they ever recognized? That's the question that begins haunting people after the betrayal. And the answer becomes impossible to ignore once the spiritual cord is finally cut and they're left standing on their own. Number 2, the cutting of the spiritual cord. Every connection carries an exchange. Not always money, not always words, not always visible effort, but every relationship creates an energetic environment that affects the people inside it. Some relationships drain you. Some relationships confuse you. Some relationships strengthen you. And then there are rare connections that quietly provide stability, clarity, protection, and growth without either person fully realizing the extent of their impact. That's why the moment of separation often feels so different than people expect. When they betrayed you, discarded you, or pushed you away, they believed they were removing a person from their life. They thought they were making a simple decision. They thought they could walk away, replace the connection, and continue operating exactly as before. But what they failed to understand was that some losses don't reveal themselves immediately. Some losses reveal themselves through absence. At first, everything may have appeared normal. The routines remained the same. The plans remained the same. The confidence remained the same. In fact, some people become even more arrogant immediately after a betrayal because they mistake temporary momentum for permanent security. They look around and say, "See? Nothing changed." They interpret the lack of immediate consequences as proof that they made the right choice. But life has a way of exposing reality over time. Because once the connection is gone, the unseen support attached to that connection leaves with it. The conversations that once brought clarity are gone. The loyalty that once balanced chaos is gone. The presence that once stabilized situations is gone. The quiet influence that softened consequences is gone. And suddenly life begins feeling different. Not dramatically at first. Subtly. A delay here. A conflict there. A door that unexpectedly closes. An opportunity that falls through. A relationship that becomes strained. A growing sense that things require more effort than they used to. Listen carefully. This is often the most confusing stage for people who operated from entitlement. They can feel the difference, but they can't explain it. They know something has shifted, but they don't know what. The ease that once followed them seems harder to find. The momentum they once enjoyed becomes inconsistent. Situations that used to resolve themselves now become prolonged battles. And because they never recognized the value of the connection while it existed, they don't immediately connect the change to the loss. Instead, they blame circumstances. They blame timing. They blame other people. They blame bad luck. Anything except the possibility that they may have severed something far more important than they understood. That's why this stage often feels jarring. For years they were operating with an invisible support system they didn't appreciate. Then one day it's gone. Not because it was taken from them unfairly, because they chose to remove it. They made a decision based on ego, arrogance, impatience, or disrespect, and now they're experiencing life without the stabilizing force they once took for granted. You see this pattern all the time. People don't recognize the value of peace until chaos arrives. They don't recognize the value of loyalty until betrayal arrives. They don't recognize the value of protection until exposure arrives. And they don't recognize the value of certain people until those people are gone. That's the painful irony. The lesson only becomes visible after the loss. By the time they start noticing the difference, the cord has already been cut. The connection has already changed. The environment they once benefited from no longer belongs to them. And for the first time, they're standing alone with the consequences of their own choices. That's when reality starts becoming impossible to ignore. Because everything they attempted to send toward you, every act of disrespect, every ounce of malice, every hidden intention, now has nowhere else to go. And that's where the story takes an even more uncomfortable turn. Because the energy they projected outward is about to begin moving back toward its source. Number 3, the karmic boomerang. One of the most misunderstood spiritual laws is that energy always seeks a destination. Every intention, every action, every word, every hidden motive eventually completes a cycle. People often believe they can project negativity outward indefinitely without consequence. They assume what they send into the world simply disappears once it leaves their hands. But that's not how life works. Everything returns somewhere. And that's where many people make a devastating mistake after betraying a chosen one. While the connection still existed, there was often a degree of balance in their life they didn't fully understand. They had access to patience they didn't deserve, grace they didn't appreciate, opportunities they didn't earn, stability they took for granted. They mistook these things as permanent features of their reality instead of temporary gifts flowing through a connection they failed to honor. Then the betrayal happened, the disrespect happened, the dismissal happened, and suddenly the environment changed. Not because someone cursed them, not because revenge was taken, not because justice arrived in dramatic fashion. The change happened because the protection of the relationship was gone. And once that protection disappeared, they became fully exposed to the consequences of their own energy. Think about that. For years they may have been projecting jealousy, manipulation, dishonesty, resentment, selfishness, or arrogance into situations around them. Yet somehow life continued moving forward. Somehow the consequences seemed delayed. Somehow the outcomes never appeared as severe as they should have been. Then one day, everything begins catching up. Not all at once, but steadily. The relationship problems become harder to fix. The opportunities become harder to secure. The conflicts become harder to avoid. The mistakes become harder to hide. The consequences become harder to escape. Listen carefully. This is the stage where people start asking questions they never asked before. Why is everything becoming so difficult? Why does nothing seem to work anymore? Why do problems keep appearing from every direction? What changed? What changed is that the buffer disappeared. The shield disappeared. The stabilizing force disappeared. For the first time in a long time, they are experiencing life without the extra grace they once benefited from. And the timing often feels impossible to ignore. The same person they disrespected is becoming stronger. The same person they dismissed is finding peace. The same person they underestimated is moving forward. Meanwhile, their own life feels increasingly complicated. That contrast becomes impossible to avoid. Now, this doesn't mean every challenge in their life is punishment. Life is more nuanced than that. But there is a profound difference between facing ordinary challenges and facing the accumulated consequences of patterns you've refused to change. The problem isn't one bad decision. The problem is that many of the attitudes that led them to betray you in the first place are still operating inside them. The arrogance is still there. The entitlement is still there. The dishonesty is still there. The lack of gratitude is still there. And without the protection they once enjoyed, those patterns begin producing results much faster than before. That's why karmic return often feels shocking. Not because it comes from nowhere, because it comes from somewhere very familiar. It comes from them, their choices, their actions, their patterns, their energy. What they attempted to place on others slowly circles back into their own experience. Not as revenge, not as cruelty, but as consequence. Life has a way of revealing people to themselves. And once the shield is gone, that process accelerates. This is the part many chosen ones need to understand. You don't have to fight for justice. You don't have to chase accountability. You don't have to spend your energy proving what happened. Reality does that work on its own timetable. Because eventually every person meets the results of the energy they've been creating. And for many of the people who betrayed you, that meeting is already happening. The strange part is that even while everything around them starts becoming more difficult, they still can't figure out what's missing. They know something is gone. They know life feels different. They know the peace they once enjoyed has become harder to find. But they still haven't fully understood the size of the void they created. And that's exactly what their life looks like now. Number 4, their current restless reality. One of the most interesting things about karmic consequences is that they rarely arrive looking the way people expect. Most people imagine collapse as something dramatic. They imagine public humiliation, obvious failure, or some visible event that everyone can point to and say, "That's what happened." But in reality, many collapses begin in silence. They begin internally. They begin with a growing sense that something is missing. That's why the first thing many people lose after betraying an important connection is not money, status, relationships, or opportunities. The first thing they lose is peace. And peace is one of the hardest things in the world to recover once it's gone. From the outside, their life may still appear functional. They may still be working, socializing, achieving goals, and maintaining appearances. Yet beneath the surface, something feels different. The ease they once enjoyed becomes harder to find. The confidence they once carried becomes more fragile. The certainty they once relied on slowly begins to fade. At first, they usually dismiss the feeling. They tell themselves they're stressed. They tell themselves they're tired. They tell themselves they're simply going through a difficult season. But as time passes, the discomfort remains. That's because the issue isn't external. The issue is that they've lost access to something they never fully appreciated while they had it. They thought they were leaving behind a person. They didn't realize they were also leaving behind an environment, an atmosphere, a stabilizing influence, a source of balance that had quietly become part of their everyday life. Now, without that influence present, everything requires more effort. Relationships become more complicated. Decisions become more difficult. Emotional stability becomes harder to maintain. The same life that once felt manageable now feels strangely heavy. What makes this stage so frustrating for them is that they often try to solve the problem without identifying the cause. They seek new relationships, new opportunities, new distractions, new environments. They keep moving, changing, replacing, searching. Yet no matter what they add to their life, the feeling remains. That's because they're attempting to replace an experience they never understood. They assumed the value was in the person alone. They never recognized the energy attached to the connection. As a result, every replacement feels incomplete. Every new situation feels slightly off. Every attempt to recreate the old sense of peace falls short. The more they chase it, the more obvious its absence becomes. Listen carefully. One of the most painful realizations a person can have is discovering that not everything in life is replaceable. Some opportunities return. Some relationships return. Some seasons return. But certain connections are unique. Certain people carry something into your life that cannot simply be duplicated by finding someone else. That's the lesson many of them are wrestling with now. They may not say it out loud. They may not even consciously admit it to themselves. Yet the question follows them everywhere. Why doesn't anything feel the same anymore? The answer is uncomfortable because it forces them to acknowledge what they spent so much time denying. The loyalty they discarded was unique. The peace they took for granted was unique. The support they overlooked was unique. And once it was gone, they discovered that replacing a person is much easier than replacing what that person brought into their life. That's why many of them appear restless today. They stay busy because stillness forces reflection. They keep searching because finding the truth would require accountability. They keep convincing themselves the next opportunity, the next relationship, or the next achievement will finally restore what they're missing. But deep down, they know something isn't working. They know something changed. They know a void exists that wasn't there before. And no matter how much they try to fill that space, the emptiness remains. Because what they lost wasn't merely a relationship. It was something they can never truly duplicate. Number 5, the unreplaceable void. One of the hardest lessons some people ever learn is that not everything in life can be replaced. Modern culture teaches the opposite. It tells people that if one relationship ends, another will appear. If one opportunity disappears, another will arrive. If one person leaves, someone else can easily take their place. While that may be true in certain situations, it is not true for every situation. Some people carry a presence that cannot be duplicated because what they bring into a person's life goes far beyond what can be measured on the surface. That's the reality many of your enemies eventually confront. When they first walked away, they assumed replacement would be simple. They believed they could find someone else to fill the role. Someone else to provide support. Someone else to provide loyalty. Someone else to provide attention, encouragement, patience, understanding, or whatever benefit they had grown accustomed to receiving. What they didn't understand was that they were focusing on functions while ignoring frequency. They were looking at what you did rather than who you were. And that's where the miscalculation happened. Because people can imitate behavior, but they cannot duplicate essence. Someone else can offer conversation, but not your perspective. Someone else can offer support, but not your spirit. Someone else can occupy the position, but not carry the same presence. The reason certain people become irreplaceable is not because they're perfect. It's because they bring together a combination of qualities that cannot simply be copied and transferred into another person. Over time, this realization becomes impossible to ignore. Every comparison quietly points back to the same conclusion. The replacements may look different. The circumstances may look different. The outcomes may look different. Yet something remains absent. Something remains missing. The sense of stability, trust, alignment, or peace they once experienced never fully returns in the same form. This is where many chosen ones underestimate their value. You spent so much time being overlooked that you forgot how rare your qualities actually are. You became so accustomed to giving that you stopped recognizing what you were giving. Meanwhile, the people benefiting from your presence became so accustomed to receiving that they stopped appreciating what they were receiving. Only after the loss does the truth become clear. The connection wasn't ordinary. The loyalty wasn't ordinary. The energy wasn't ordinary. And the void left behind isn't ordinary either. That's why no matter how many substitutions are attempted, something remains unresolved. Because what was lost was never just a person. It was a unique alignment that existed only once in that particular form. And once it's gone, the absence becomes its own lesson. The lesson is simple. Some blessings are so familiar that people mistake them for permanent fixtures in their life. Then one day those blessings leave, and only then do they realize how much of their peace was connected to something they never properly valued. And by the time that realization arrives, the opportunity to appreciate it has already passed. So if you've been wondering why their life seemed to shift after they betrayed you, the answer may be much simpler than they ever imagined. They thought they were removing a person. They never considered they might be removing a blessing. Throughout this message, we've explored a truth many chosen ones discover only after years of questioning their own value. The people around you often become so accustomed to your presence that they stop recognizing what your presence contributes. They become familiar with the peace, the stability, the loyalty, the encouragement, and the unseen strength you bring into every environment. Eventually, they stop viewing those things as gifts and start viewing them as guarantees. That's when gratitude disappears. And when gratitude disappears, wisdom usually follows. The tragedy isn't that they lost you. The tragedy is that they never understood what they had while they had it. They mistook consistency for permanence. They mistook access for ownership. They mistook a blessing for something ordinary. And now they're left trying to understand why the same life that once flowed so easily suddenly feels filled with resistance. But this message isn't really about them. It's about you. Because one of the most important lessons every chosen one must learn is that your value does not decrease simply because someone failed to recognize it. Your worth does not depend on another person's awareness. Your purpose does not require validation from people who cannot see it. And your future should never be tied to individuals who only appreciate your presence after your absence teaches them a lesson. That's why you must never shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Never lower your standards to regain access to people who mishandled your loyalty. Never return to places that only recognize your value after they've experienced life without it. Keep moving forward. Keep protecting your peace. Keep honoring your purpose. And remember this. Some people thought losing you would cost them nothing. Then they spent the rest of their journey discovering exactly what they lost. If this message resonated with you, comment below. I know my value now. And if you're part of this community of chosen ones, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this message with someone who needs the reminder today. Because your presence was never ordinary, and neither is your future.